skip.
It happens again.
Let's go!
Oh my god!
What does it take to skip a layer? So first off, how are we defining a last layer skip? This is important. I'm going to define it as using a method that would expect to have a last layer step, or at least expecting to have a last layer step in the solve that you are doing, and not having one. And, you know, some people, for the sake of argument, will try to include a root using the M-slices last layer, and 4C skips are quite common. That's a different argument for a different time, whether or not root is a layer-by-layer method, has a last layer, etc. I might make a different video on that. This is more about your traditional layer-by-layer methods in the Big Four. So we're going to be talking about CFOP, ZZ, and Petrus. And I don't know if anyone else is the same, but personally I've always split those Big Four methods into two groups, the block builders with root and Petrus, and the layer-by-layer with ZZ and CFOP. But Petrus is still a layer-by-layer method, it just builds the layers by building blocks, unlike root, which sort of does some stuff up the outside and is a bit more ambiguous. So we're going to be talking about Petrus as well. Although I say that, I'm not going to mention it again because it has the same last slot and last layer stuff going on as ZZ, being EOLS and EOLL. So whenever I mention ZZ in this video, just in your mind you can add on a little and Petrus, and remember that that method does in fact exist. Right, so let's get to the video. What does it take to skip the last layer? If you ask any CFOPper, you know, what does it take to skip the last layer, they'll probably tell you it takes 1 out of 15,552 odds. That's the going number for a last layer skip with no trick going on in the CFOP method, 15,552. So, does it take near 16,000 solves? Does it take incredible luck? Well, no, because that number can be trimmed down very easily. Think of it as like a raffle, like a name in the hat kind of thing. The more names you have in the hat, the more likely you are to get your one pulled and get a last layer skip. If you're just using the default inserts like this and this, you don't have very many in the hat. You can very easily pretty much double the amount you have by learning a few simple tricks. For CFOP, people will start using sledge for edge controls. If they see they have something like this, they'll use sledge to insert so they have solved edges, so they can get an OCLL or maybe do ZBLL. And, you know, I'd like to think that most cubers of a decent speed would know this winter variation case. They know to insert this with a U2 to skip OLL. So by knowing those two extra inserts, you kind of double the names you have in the hat and you raise the chances. And if you're going to step a little further into knowing special tricks, there's always this, the 3 corners oriented winter variation, where you break up the pair, solve it, and install this pair over here. That's the wrong direction, Swagrid, come on. Obviously, the odds of skipping last layer are at the baseline 1 out of 15,552 for CFOP is a combination of the odds of skipping OLL, which by default is 1 out of 216, combined with the odds of skipping PLL, 1 out of 72. So by learning these different inserts and tricks for CFOP, the 3 of them that I've shown you, you just raise the odds of skipping OLL. You put more names in the hat for OLL, and the more likely you are to skip OLL, the more chances you get to also skip PLL on that same solve. So now your odds are up to like a 4 out of 216 for skipping OLL to then get the chance to roll 1 out of 72 for skipping PLL. But the odds still aren't particularly high. There's a much, much better way to raise your chances for a last layer skip dramatically, and that's just to switch your method. If we go back to using like stock ZZ and Petrus, just normal inserts, not even the U2 trick, your odds of skipping the last layer are 1 out of 1,944. This is because, with much less combinations of OLL due to always having EO solved, your odds of skipping OLL go from 1 out of 216 to 1 out of 27. So you're going to be skipping OLL quite frequently, which means you're going to have more chances to roll for the PLL skip. If we stop thinking of the 1 out of 27 as being skip odds, and instead we think of it as last slot cases where you can skip OLL, well, now if we add those 2 more, we're going to have sort of 3 out of 27, that's kind of 1 out of 9 if you have built pair, nothing much for a split pair, but it means that you have more cases when you're going to insert the pair where you can skip OLL, which then means that more often you're going to be able to roll for the PLL skip. Okay, some of you are obviously going to be thinking, Swagrid, use ZZCT, you're always posting last layer skips, you have a whole gallery with like 40 odd last layer skips as of time of recording. What about ZZCT? What are the skip odds there? Well, this is where the definition of a last layer skip stretches a bit, and this is where my definition from earlier comes in. I'm going to define it as using a method that would expect to have a last layer step, or at least expecting to have a last layer step in the solve that you are doing, and not having one. A last layer step in the method that you would expect. So what would we expect for ZZCT? Well, let's take a look. So for ZZCT, you would expect one of two possibilities when you get to the last slot. You would expect that either you do TSLE and you get a TTLL case, or you do TSLE, the corner happens to end up in slot, and you get PLL. One of these is obviously well defined as a last layer set, TLL. TTLL is a bit more arguable. It literally has last layer in the name, Tran Thompson last layer, and it is the ending step and it solves all of the pieces on the last layer and one more, but a lot of the marketing around ZZCT was that it's the world's first effective last layer skip method. So does it count as a last layer step? Does it count as an F2L step? Personally, for the sake of this video, I'm classing it as a last layer step. Go ahead and fight me in the comments, it'll only raise my viewer interaction rate. Do it. So what are the odds then of skipping TTLL, or having to get cornered and skipping PLL for ZZCT? Well, it's 1 out of 360. Because when you solve TSLE, you're orienting all of the corners and putting the edge in slot, but you're not paying any attention to where the D layer corner goes. It has 5 possible places it can be, the 4 spots in the U layer and DFR, and obviously that's a 1 in 5 chance that it just ends up to be in DFR, and if you do that, well, this will be inserted and these will be oriented and you will skip OLL. So you have a 1 out of 5 chance of skipping OLL after TSLE, and going straight into a last layer, and out of those 1 in 5, you then get to roll each time the 1 out of 72 that you skip PLL. 72 times 5 is 360, 1 out of 360 for a TTLL skip. So what? Do I skip last layer 1 out of every 360 solves? No. I skip it more often. Because I use OLS. OLS is like the weird brother of ZBLL. It's less popular, more algs, and probably less effective. I can make a different video about OLS versus ZBLL at some other time. What does OLS do? Well, it stands for Orient Last Slot, or Orientation During Last Slot, and it is literally what it sounds like. While you solve the last F2L pair, you orient everything. It's like TSLE, but 5 times as many cases because you actually care where the D layer goes. So, for each TSLE case, you'll have like 5 algs. You have literally 502 algs in the set, which is just a few more than there is in ZBLL, but if we're looking at last layer skip odds, it means that you get 1 out of 1 skip odds on OLL. Every single solve you will dodge OLL because you're solving it during last slot. And if last slot just happens to be solved, you just do OLL and say it was OLS. Just ignore it, bro, who cares? This means that every solve you get to roll for that 1 out of 72 chance of skipping PLL. Your last layer skip odds are 1 out of 72. I mean, this can't go any lower without an unreasonable amount of algs, right? Like, you already have 502, which is quite a few. And, what are you gonna do? OLS and corner permutation? I think it's like 1 in 12, but god damn, that's 6 times as many algs. You already have 500 there. There's no better way. Is there? Oh. There is. We just have to sacrifice the idea of speed, throw in a couple extra steps, some block building, and we can have something mental. So, I'm going to introduce 2 new ideas now that I haven't yet mentioned in this video, and they're both going to play into this method. This is something viable for ZZ and Petrus. Well, by viable I mean it can be used. I'm not saying it's good. But the first of these ideas is tripod. Now what tripod is when you're solving F2L, and you get to the last pair, before you solve the last pair, like here, you're going to solve a 1x2x2 block, like a tripod block. So it effectively consists of 2 edges with the corner in it. You solve this before you solve the pair. So for example here, I have to comb this pair in, and we have that. That is tripod. It can be a little bit awkward to play around with, kind of inconvenient sometimes when you're trying to solve the last pair, and it's quite different. It adds a whole look to the solve, and you build this weird block on the U layer. Whatever. How does this play in? Well, if we combine tripod, which was originally posed as a method of reducing last layer cases, you can only get PLLs that have certain large blocks in them, and it largely reduces ZBLL cases, If we combine that with another idea that was made to reduce CBL cases, phasing. Now what phasing is a method of inserting the last pair while solving two opposite edges. What this will do is mean that basically both pairs of edges that belong opposite to each other are opposite to each other, but they might not all be solved. Allow me to demonstrate. I am going to insert this pair, and I'm going to phase. The edges that I'm paying attention to are the blue, which is back here, and the green edge. They belong opposite each other, and they're going to end up opposite each other. As you can see, here they are, they're both opposite and they're both solved. So the red and orange still have to be opposite each other, but you can see they're not solved, they're in like a parity case. If you phase in that slot, you'll reduce ZBLL from 493 to 169 cases. If you phase while using tripod, you actually force all of the edges to be solved. There's none of this where you can have two of them be solved and two of them not be solved. Because you have this one solved correctly relative to the other set, then when you phase this edge in, this one has to be solved. It has no other choice. What you end up doing when you intuitively build a tripod block and then insert the last pair while phasing all of the edges to be solved is you reduce the last layer to just 3 corners. Last 3 corners ZBLL. How many of these inserts are there, you ask? 71. There are 71 in total, one short of the amount of ALGs in TTLL. Interesting. How many last 3 corner ZBLLs are there? 23. Barely more cases than there are in PLL. This means that for tripod with phasing you have a total of 94 ALGs, which is not a lot. If you think of ZZCT with 1 out of 360 skip odds, that had 198 odd ALGs, right? TS Elite on its own has 105. In this case, the whole method for this has 94. Well, the skip odds for it? Well, for last 3 corners, the skip odds are 1 out of 54. 54! Let's put this into perspective. If we go back to the default CFOP last layer skip statistics, 1 out of 15,552, we now have 1 out of 54. It is 288 times more likely to skip last layer than CFOP. And it has like 20 more ALGs, like CFOP has 78 ALGs, this has 94, would you believe? Is it good for speed? No, but it is very interesting. This is just one of those cool, like niche, interesting theory brain candy methods. You wouldn't really want to use it for speed, but knowing that if you wanted to, you could sit down and do an AO50 with this method and be disappointed if you didn't skip last layer in those 50 solves. That's crazy. Obviously, there's some crazy other stuff. There's stuff like QM, like ZZQM that I know Orchestra's been working with and trying to make a fast method that is a last layer skip method. There's all sorts of things that will sort of guarantee last layer skips. Obviously, I made a point that the method or the solve has to expect to have a last layer step in order to have a last layer skip. But there's all sorts of crazy stuff that could be theory crafted to push this even further, with ridiculously bloated ALG counts to skip last layer all the time or super frequently, like half the time. But as far as just theory crafting stuff for the fun of it and seeing what happens to skip last layer a lot, NLS-B, which is the nickname for this ALG set that inserts with the phasing, has been the best. It's called NLS-B, by the way, because the step for inserting the last pair with the tripod block in the U layer was called Neuro last slot, after the guy that proposed tripod and sort of made all the ALGs for it in that. And B is the suffix given to the ZZ variant where you phase. It is ZZB. So by combining phasing with Neuro last slot, we have NLS-B. So if you ever get bored and feel like learning 100 odd ALGs, why not try learning all of the inserts and all of the last 3 corner ZBLLs? And then you can sit down, do 50 solves, and probably skip the last layer. Alright, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I hope it put you to sleep.